series called Hear and See, looking at the parables and miracles of Jesus. We spent, if you are interested in the parables, we spent about 6 weeks going through Jesus' most famous ones. You can go on iTunes, go on our website, go on SoundCloud, or on YouTube, audio, video, all over the place. Go search for us on any of those major platforms, our church name, and you'll find those messages there. In the last 2 weeks, we've done the miracles. And this morning, we're looking at another very famous miracle, Jesus walking on water. So we are going to start that out this morning. It'll probably be familiar to a lot of you who've grown up in church, who have walked with Jesus for a while. If it's new to you, that's also wonderful. This is Matthew 14:22 through 33. Pick up a Bible on your table, on your smartphone. There's a link at the bottom of the bulletin that you can type in if you want to go right to the verses, or you can read along on the screen behind me. Matthew 14:22 through 33. Immediately he, Jesus, made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" They cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come out on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took hold of him, saying to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when he got back into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the word of the Lord. Well, like the other miracles we've seen the last couple weeks, again, this one will be very well known to a lot of people. It's so well known that it actually seeps into a lot of pop culture, a lot of our movies and things. Very common to see themes of walking on water. Hear someone say, "I can't walk on water," and then that means I can't do miracles or everything, but I can do X, Y, or Z. So I thought it'd be fun, because it has gone into a lot of culture, to look at a movie clip, one of the most famous scenes probably of walking on water. And if you can believe it, this movie came out in 2003. It's a movie where one guy is given all the powers of Morgan Freeman. I mean, all the powers of God. And that's a joke. Bruce Almighty may be familiar, way back to 2003 with Jim Carrey. And so here's a scene walking on water. It's just at the moment when God, Morgan Freeman, is giving all his powers and explaining the rules to Bruce as he's learning he now has the power of God. So let's watch.
Thou.
Come. Take a closer walk with me. Let me explain the rules.
Rules?
Yeah, you left in such a rush, I didn't get a chance to explain.
2 extra fingers freaked me out a little bit.
I just figured I'd get your attention. I did the same thing to Gandhi. He didn't eat for 3 weeks. Anyway, here's the deal. You have all my powers. Use them any way you choose. There are only 2 rules. You can't tell anybody you're God. Believe me, you don't want that kind of attention. And you can't mess with free will.
Can I ask why?
Yes, you can. That's the beauty of it.
This is amazing.
Oh, speaking of amazing, excuse me.
Holy cow.
Since you're through with these, I think I'll keep them. Might come in handy someday. See you around, kid.
Where are you going?
I'm taking a vacation.
God doesn't take vacations, does he? Do ye?
Did you ever hear of the Dark Ages? Besides, I'm covered. You can clear everything up in 5 minutes if you want to, right? Ciao.
And then we break into I've got the power, and Bruce does many good things on the earth. No, he very funny scene ensues from that. If you haven't seen it, it's really a funny movie. If you know any sort of Bible stories, there's all sorts of cheesy jokes that go into mixed with pop culture and understanding of the Bible. So it's very enjoyable. But of course, today we're not talking about some silly pop culture reference to walking on water. Today, Jesus is showing us something much greater in this story, something much more fantastical than a funny movie with Jim Carrey. What this story reveals is some of the most encouraging words about the God who is with us in the storms of our lives and calls us to fix our eyes on him and watch him do amazing things through us. So let's start out. Let's look at the story together, starting out in verse 22. The first thing that we're going to see from this story is that Jesus isn't the God who keeps us from the storms of life, but he is indeed the God who actually sends us into the storms. So as we look at those first verses, if you were here last week, you might recognize that this story immediately follows the feeding of the 5,000 plus that we looked at last week. It is immediately after, and in fact, Matthew says, immediately he made his disciples. This is just after that. This story takes off right where we left out of that immediate context last week. So Matthew says, after the feeding of the 5,000, after all those people, 5,000 plus, all those people were fed and satisfied, he immediately made his disciples get into a boat and go to the other side. Now, we might ask, Matthew just kind of says that, and it's like, why did Jesus do that? Why, after everyone was fed in this amazing miracle, does it seem like he so quickly ushers, his disciples, get out of here, let's skedaddle? Matthew leaves it really unexplained, but the helpful thing is because this story appears in other places, John gives us some details about why that was going on. He tells us there were some in the crowd who were seeking to make Jesus king. So, right then and there, after this incredible healing and teaching had gone on for hours, the story told us before, and then this amazing provision, water into, bread and fish multiplying again and again and again, some people are like, hey, this is great. This guy can go take over Rome. We can stage a political coup. He'll probably just, zap lightnings and take out the Romans anytime he wants. We'll stick him as king. Everything will be good for Israel again. This Jesus guy is the tops. Let's go take him away to that. But Jesus knows he's not here for any earthly kingdom, right? He is not here to be that type of king. So the first thing he does is he says to his disciples, you guys need to get out of here. This isn't what my mission is about. You need to understand my kingdom is not a political, earthly kingdom. And so he, in a sense, protects them, sends them on away, and he's going to keep them focused on what his mission is. And then he does somehow his slip away thing. However he does that, he's Jesus. So he slips away from the crowd, even though they were seeking to make him king, gets away from thousands of people, and finally he gets some time by himself to be alone. If you remember, before the feeding of the 5,000 plus, Jesus was seeking to go spend some alone time with God. Now he's finally got it with his Father. Perhaps a little time to mourn after his cousin John the Baptist was beheaded so brutally and killed. So Jesus gets this time of prayer and focus with God. He gets his time to focus on his Father, to focus on his mission while his disciples are sent ahead, reminding himself probably and his Father reminding him, this is not what you're here for. Here is what you are here for. He is after the souls of men and women. But let's step away from Jesus alone on the mountain, spending time with the Father, and we catch up with the disciples in verse 24, who get sent ahead on the boat. They're off in the boat. The meal, if you remember, that Jesus did with the feeding of the 5,000 plus was probably a dinner meal, probably happened in the early evening or so. And Matthew tells us what happens. He was there. He was an eyewitness. As they went out on the water, a huge wind and probably a huge storm as part of that comes upon them. John tells us the distance in his own version of this, that with modern day conversions, that means they were about 3 miles away from the coast, and they were not able to get back because of this huge storm. Matthew tells us they were battling all the way until the 4th watch of the night. The Roman system divided the night into 4 sections. Very simple, 6 to 9 p.m., 9 to 12 p.m., 12 to 3, and 3 to 6. So the 4th watch of the night is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. What does that mean? They've been battling this storm, this wind, for about 9 hours or so, depending on when that meal actually started. This is possibly the worst storm they have ever been in. And remember, what's the occupation of some of these disciples, of many of them? They were fishermen, right? What do fishermen do? How do they get their fish? They're sailors. They are masters of the sea. This is the Sea of Galilee. This is a place, they're from Galilee. They are very familiar with this sea. They've done it almost their entire professional lives and probably also as children. And yet this storm is so great that it's taking them 9 hours plus potentially to try and battle it and try to get to where they are going. They have encountered possibly the worst storm they have ever been in. So they must be thinking, Jesus sent us away into this, we just saw him do this incredible miracle. We know he's more than a prophet. Why in the world did he send us into this? Why has he abandoned us? Maybe they were fearful of their lives even by this point because it was so strong. But think about this. Apparently, Jesus did not hesitate at all to send them into this storm. Matthew gives us the impression Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. And he gets explicit time with his own Father alone, and he knows what his disciples are going to encounter while he is getting his time with his Father's. In the least, based on the rest of the gospel accounts, we know, based on the rest of the stuff that Jesus knows, he knows what he's doing. He knows what's happening on the lake or what's going to happen to them when he sends them out there. And he knows he's going to show up in a miraculous way and meet them on the lake. And he sends them anyways. Now, there are prominent teachers out there. Some people with huge churches. Some people that have TV shows. Some people who appear on TBN on a regular basis. Some people who are on the president's faith advisory team. Who will tell you the good news of the gospel is that Jesus will save you from storms in your life? They will tell you, if you put your faith in Jesus, he will make your life easy, or at least easier. You will have your best life now. You will get wealthier. You will have full health. And the only ultimate reason, they say, that you don't have those things is because, like Peter later in this story, you have little faith. And so you need to increase your faith if you want those things to happen. It's called the prosperity gospel. If you only trusted Jesus more, they say, you'd be as rich as them, you'd be as successful as them, you'd be as healthy as them. It's very tempting to believe those messages, and a lot of people do, because who doesn't want a little more money, if not a lot more money? Who doesn't want perfect health? Who doesn't want great success in their lives? I hope by seeing this story alone, you would know how to combat those lies and those false messages. That prosperity gospel is a false gospel. It is false good news. Those are false teachers making those claims. Look, The Christian life is not about God saving us from the storms in our lives. Christian life is not about being saved out of hardship, out of trials. Jesus here sends his closest disciples, his most beloved disciples, the ones he wants to build his entire church upon, into the greatest storm they've ever been in their entire lives. Is it because they lacked faith? Is it because he was somehow punishing them? Is it because he stopped loving them? Is it because he's some sort of sadist and he likes to punish his people? I hope you know it's a resounding no to all of those things. Some storms in our lives, some trials that we go through, some hard times, hardships that we have, come into our lives simply because we're human, right? You don't have to be Christian. You could be any other religion. You could be totally secular. You could be atheist. Everyone has hard problems come into our lives. Some storms come into our lives because of our own poor decisions. Sometimes we make foolish decisions in our lives, and that's why we have storms. Some storms come because other people have done wrong things to us, right? And then some storms come just because we live in a broken world, in a broken universe. Disease, pain, cancer, natural disasters. None of those things are directly our fault, but they still come, and they cause unbelievable storms, pain, hardships in our lives. This is the normal reality, not only if you're a follower of Jesus, but for everyone. And then some storms will come into your life directly because you decide to follow Jesus, if you are a follower of him in here. Jesus promised his followers this would happen at times. Would the disciples have been in this terrible storm if they had not been following Jesus? I mean, maybe they would have decided to go out and fish that night. Most likely, they wouldn't have been out late at night like they were here. These disciples are in this storm, the greatest storm of their lives, because they decided to follow Jesus. At times, it will be the same for us. You know, when I think about our own story of coming here to Studio City, we've had well-meaning people who love Jesus, people who are great and lots of experience in ministry or good family members of ours. We've had a lot of people come to us and ask us why we are here in Studio City specifically. They say sometimes, surely there are other places that are cheaper to live, that are easier to start a church in, where you're going to get a better response to your message of the gospel that you're trying to share than you would in Studio City. They mean really well, but we're not here telling people about Jesus and getting people in our church here involved in this community so we can get an easy life out of it. We're not here to be comfortable, even. There are a lot of doctrinal beliefs that I could quickly drop because a lot of other people would accept our message if I didn't believe some of those specific doctrinal beliefs. It'd be really easy to do that because I like people to like me. Surprise. I want people to think I'm great and wonderful and the best person on earth. And it'd be a lot easier to make that happen if I would drop some of the things that we believe as a church. But that's not the point of why Jesus sent us here to Studio City, we believe. So if you're a follower of Jesus, if you currently or plan to follow him in the future and you're exploring who he is, do not do it because you think it will lead to a storm-free life. If you make that mistake, if you listen to those false teachers, you can go to lots of places to find that message. If you listen to those people, you'll probably in the end up leaving Jesus, because when the storms inevitably come, wherever they come from, you will say, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I signed up for things getting easier. I signed up for things not being harder. And you will sadly, possibly leave Jesus. The good news of Jesus, the gospel, is not that he keeps us from the storms of life. The good news of Jesus, which is the next point of our story, is that he is God with us in the worst storms of our lives. So let's look at that point here. This is where it gets good, in my opinion. Look how Jesus, in the very last watch of the night, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., something like that in the morning, just at the time they needed it most, comes to his desperate disciples. Now we have to get kind of the scene of somewhat comedic reality that is going on here. So, verse 25 starts, in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when they saw him, they were terrified and cried out, "It's a ghost!" Kind of understandable, right? It's hard to picture this. So there's a huge storm going on. They've been battling for 9+ hours, potentially. It's been raging on. They are fearful for their lives, probably. They're probably drenched in water. If there wasn't rain, at least it was coming in from the waves. So they are a complete wreck. They've probably been yelling at each other. You know, you ever been in some stressful situation with other people that you love or other coworkers, and it's extremely stressful? There's lots of yelling that probably goes on. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the storm, they look over and Jesus is doing, this thing, walking by. I think it's Mark's account of this. It might be John's. Mark's account, one of the accounts says, Jesus intended to pass them by as he was going. So you get this picture of he's just coming along, doo-doo-doo, and they're freaking out. They're yelling at each other. They're super scared. And of course, they know people can't walk on water. So the only thing they come up with is, this is a ghost. It's a very reasonable. Sometimes people say, oh, people in the Bible were so naive and they're so, overly spiritual. Of course they believe in these things. No, they're very reasonable here. People don't walk on water. Got to be something else, maybe a ghost. And they cry out. As comedic as this potentially is, and as you think of funny pictures in your mind, you have to see the contrast between Jesus and the disciples here. Jesus has no fear of the storm, we see. He is calm through it all. He sees the terror of his disciples as they're freaking out, as everything's going wrong. And his response to them, even though he's as calm as can be, is, take heart. Take courage. It is I. Guys, it's me. Don't be afraid. When you are going through the worst times of your life, when you are the most afraid, when you see no way out of the particular trial or storm that you are going through, when you're at the absolute end of your rope, and you're completely freaking out, and you're wondering, perhaps like the disciples were, where is God in this? Why has he left us? Why did he send me into X, Y, or Z? This story teaches us he's right there. He's not freaking out. He's standing with you. He is calm. And he says to you, take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. I'm here. I'm with you. I know your needs. I know what you can handle. Trust me. So what are you going through right now that absolutely terrifies you? Or what do you see on the horizon in your life that you are really afraid of? Some storm that's coming that maybe it's a situation at work, maybe it's a situation with your family, a situation with a loved one. What things in your life seem insurmountable, whether they are specifically tied to a step of faith or whether they're just a normal life situation? How should Jesus' presence with you through it all help you to take courage in the midst of it? How should it change the way you're responding to that difficulty right now? How should his calm help you to respond to that storm? As you meditate on those questions, let's look at the conclusion of the story and see what happens here at the end. As we are called to fix our eyes on his calm, the thing that he wants from us is to do just that, to keep our eyes set not on our circumstances, not on the storms, but to fix our eyes on him. So, this is where Peter's amazing response comes in to Jesus. So, Jesus says out there, take heart, don't be afraid, it is I. And then, even before we get into Peter's response, I want to say, sometimes Peter gets a bad rap. Sometimes people are like, oh, stupid Peter. He has foot and mouth disease. He sticks his foot in his mouth all the time. But I am super thankful for Peter. Peter it's really because of his great failings that are recorded again and again and again. One of the ways you can know, potentially, that the Bible is trustworthy is because of the way it talks about the disciples. The disciples, by and large, were the ones that either are responsible for the majority of the content because it all passed down from them, or directly wrote it like Matthew here. Usually, when you write something about yourself, when you put out a PR statement, you don't put out, here's all my failings and all the ways that I've been stupid. You make yourself look good, right? You make yourself, you pump yourself up. A PR, that's why you have public relations in a company. You want to put the best spin on things. The Gospels put really negative spins on the disciples quite a bit. They fail all the time. So how can we know one way they're trustworthy? Because you usually don't do that unless it's actually what happened. So Peter sticks his foot in his mouth again and again. He even denied Jesus before Jesus went to the cross. Not one time, not 2 times, 3 times. Kind of the worst thing that you could potentially do. He is very often the opposite of a very courageous, faith-filled disciple that you would think, the type of person you would think Jesus would build his church upon and entrust his ministry to. And yet, Jesus does. He's one of the people Jesus chooses. In fact, you could argue he is the cornerstone, the chief disciple among others. God does amazing things through Peter. And because Peter's audacious faith and because his occasional foolishness, we get to learn so much more about grace and forgiveness and how God responds to our own foolishness and when we stick our foot and our feet in our mouths. So Peter here, with really no indication from Jesus at all. Jesus didn't say, take courage, have faith, it is I. And if you want to, come on out here with me, take a stroll and we'll go together. Peter just assumes, hey, if it's you, Jesus, tell me to come out to you. And it's like, where did you get that idea? Why did you think, it's Jesus. He just did all the bread stuff. He just did all amazing things, turn water into wine. We saw that earlier. He does that. You didn't turn water into wine. Like, you didn't multiply the bread. So why are you like, I can walk on water too? But Peter, he just assumes it. It's great. And Jesus says to him, come on out. It's amazing, I think. I think it's incredible. We cannot miss that Jesus enables Peter not because of Peter, but because of his trust in Jesus and his trust in Jesus's power. Jesus enables Peter to do the miraculous. We can't miss that. We'd be remiss if we didn't stop and realize God might do miraculous things through you and through me when you put your trust in him. That probably won't result in you walking on water, literally. Just putting that out there. Probably not going to happen. It might result in using you to radically transform someone else's life. It might result in God using you to share the good news of the gospel and seeing someone turn from darkness to light. There might be other supernatural things. I believe in the supernatural. But the story of Acts that we'll look at later on in the winter next year, we'll see supernatural things being done through ordinary people again and again and again. For Peter, here, he gets to walk on water. We need to ask ourselves, how should Jesus' love, his presence, his power, his goodness in our lives encourage us to step out in ways of great faith? What is God calling you to do, even though it might seem impossible? Peter had to get out of the boat when Jesus said, come to him. He had to take that step of faith himself. What ways is God calling you to get out of the boat. Well, let's see the very end here, the results of Peter doing what he does. Peter steps out on the water, and then understandably, remember, 9 hours plus, crazy storm going on, Peter starts to realize, he starts to look around a bit and goes, wait a second, worst storm of my life going on here. I'm now walking on water, kind of like Jim Carrey there is, where he's doing the thing going on. And as he takes his eyes off of Jesus, he begins to sink. Peter says, holy cow, what am I doing? I'm walking on water, large storm going on. This is crazy. And as he takes his eyes off, he begins to sink. This is good stuff here, right? This is we believe this is a literal event that happened, but this sinking of Peter is a great parable for us on what our lives following Jesus should be like. What enables us to keep going through the worst storms of our lives? What enables us to do seemingly impossible things in the eyes of the world? What will enable us to have faith through horrible things like cancer? What will enable us to have joy through tragedy that comes in our lives? What will enable us to trust Jesus in the hardest soil where people rarely respond to our message of the gospel? What will enable us to love our enemies even if they happen to ridicule us? What will enable us to fight our own sin in our hearts and fight our own selfishness when the world tells us to indulge in it and take it up and do it all? Keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus. If you're not in the worst of storms, it may be easy to keep going without needing to focus as much on Jesus and putting your direct faith in him. You can kind of glide along in life if things are going pretty well and things aren't that bad, right? If we're honest, I know I can get complacent when life seems easy. But when the storms come, when hard times come into your lives, you can't keep your faith if your eyes are fixed on the circumstances around you. If your eyes are fixed on the storm around you, you will sink in your faith. We are not strong enough. The storms of life are too great. The lesson here is not, Peter was so strong and he just happened to forget how strong he is and started to sink. The lesson is, Jesus is strong enough. He is calm through the storms. He never freaks out. He never sinks. And so fix your eyes on him, not the storm that's going on around you. Keep your faith fixed on Jesus. Don't look at the storm. Don't look at the wind. Don't look at others around you. That's one of the games I play the most. What about this person? What about that? What about them with their kids? And what about them with their church? And what about them with their finances? And me. Keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. Look to him. How do you do that? Read the scripture on your own. Study it yourself. Remind yourself of his love for you. Remind yourself of his power in stories like this. Remind yourself of his sovereignty over the storms of your lives. Remind yourself of his sacrifice on the cross and the resurrection for you from the dead, which is what we do every Sunday when we take communion together. Remind yourself every day and every hour, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. To do otherwise threatens the circumstances in our lives to overcome us and for us to start sinking. But even when we are sinking, even when we do get overcome, even when we do take our eyes off of Jesus, look how he responds to Peter. Peter realizes he's sinking. Oh my gosh, fallen in the water during the storm. He cries out, Lord, save me. And Jesus doesn't go, Peter, tisk. Don't you trust me? Didn't you remember the whole bread with remember the water with the wine stuff? Remember all those things? Come on. Don't you trust me by now? I'm really disappointed in you, Peter, but okay, I'll help you up. Matthew tells us he didn't do that at all. He immediately, Matthew says, reaches up, pulls him up out of the water. So they are standing there together. Jesus could have just spoken, right? Peter up, and, magically, whoop, comes out of the water. How encouraging would it have been to have Jesus grab Peter and to pull him up and to feel his touch, to feel his grip in his life? Look, even when we fail, which we do, right? Whether it's our own foolishness, whether it's our direct sin, whether we realize what we're doing in the moment or whether we don't and then realize it later and go, oh, what was I doing? What was I thinking? Even when our faith falters, even when we take our eyes off of Jesus, the moment you cry out, Lord, save me, help me, Jesus is not there to scold you. He is not there to tell you how disappointed he is that you failed him again. Jesus is there to grab your hand and pull you up, to pick you right up and put you back on your feet 1,000 times, day after day after day after day, for the rest of your life. Jesus simply says to Peter, don't doubt, Peter. Why do you doubt? Trust me. Remember who I am. Don't have little faith. Jesus and Peter, after we don't know how long, probably close to the boat, pulls them back up. They get back into the boat, right? And what immediately happens as they get in? The wind dies completely. It says when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. The storm is gone in the very moment that Jesus is in the presence with his disciples. They battle all night by themselves. They can't stop it. They are expert fishermen. They've done this their whole lives. They know this sea super well, and it's not until Jesus is with them in their presence that the storm ceases with one thought from his mind. The story, though, does not end there, right? Does not end just encouraging us to fix our eyes on Jesus and put our faith in him through hard times, which is a great message we should all come away with, hopefully apply to our lives today. It points us to the profound impact this miracle had on the disciples. Remember earlier, to calm the disciples, Jesus said, "Take heart, it is I." They probably didn't realize this in the moment. They probably didn't realize it just afterwards necessarily, but probably reflecting on it after Jesus' death and resurrection, they probably remembered the way that's said in Greek, and the way Jesus said that is the exact same way it's said by God, by Yahweh, in the Old Testament, in the Jewish scriptures. That's exactly the way God addressed. And if you go read the Greek version of the Old Testament, which is what the disciples at this time would have used, their Jewish scriptures would have been primarily the Septuagint, the Greek translation. They would have realized the way God spoke to Moses was saying, "It is I." The way he spoke to Abraham, the way he spoke to Isaac, the way he spoke to Jacob, to the prophets, was by saying that exact same thing. "It is I." The disciples hear those words. They see Jesus walking on the water. They see Peter step out as he trusts Jesus. They see the wind cease as soon as he steps into the boat. And what is their response? "Hey, Jesus, you're a good moral teacher. This is really nice. I just like you're a spiritual guru like all the rest of them. And this is nice. You'll be a nice path for us to follow and choose maybe someday. Maybe we'll choose another path." That's not their response, right? They worship him, Matthew tells us. Those in the boat worshiped him, and their response was, "You are Yahweh," essentially. "You are the God of Moses. You are the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." First century Jews didn't spend their entire childhoods learning that idolatry is the very worst sin you could ever do. Worshiping, telling some person or telling something, you are God, that's our thing. The whole story of the Old Testament is they worshiped a calf, everything goes wrong. They worship this other thing, everything goes wrong. They worship the Baals and do sacrifices there, everything goes wrong. Their whole lives are based on don't do idolatry, everything goes wrong when you do. And their response is worshiping Jesus before them and saying, truly, you are the Son of God. These 12 Jews see Jesus, see what he does, and they worship him. The Son of God, God himself, in a boat next to them. Today, if you put your trust in Jesus, or if you already have, he stands with you through all the storms in your life. God himself next to you every moment of every day saying, don't be afraid. It is I. It is me. Take courage. What difference should that make in your life today? Let's pray. Father, I'm so thankful that your scriptures include seemingly comedic stories where Jesus is calmly strolling along while the disciples are absolutely freaking out. It includes people like Peter who stick their feet in their mouths all the time and assume that they can walk out on the water as well. And when it does include those things, and when you show up in power, and when you respond to our faith, when you reveal your goodness and the nature of who you really are, it helps us understand how we should respond when we freak out, when we are worried, when it seems like you aren't there, and we wonder, why did you send us into this place, into this thing, into this situation? Lord, help us today to see in a new way you are there with us, the God of the universe, in a boat with us through life. And then help us to see ways that we need to step out of the boat into impossible situations, into things that seem like no one else can do. Show us how to trust you in new ways. We pray in Jesus' name.